IB Nation, welcome to a little bit of a commitment edition to this episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. This one was one that was long anticipated, had some up and downs, but ultimately Notre Dame was able to get a commitment from 2024 linebacker out of Bellflower, California, St. John Bosco, Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, who is one of the top defensive players in the entire country, one of the top players for the best team in the entire nation, just won a national championship, and a big addition to the 2024 class for the University of Notre Dame. I'm Ryan Roberts. This is Brian Driscoll. Wanted to wait until all the chaos had finally settled, until Kyngstonn had the opportunity to make his decision, because this was one that, again, a lot to dig into here, a lot of backstory, how this happened, how we got to this point. Great day to be a Notre Dame fan, though, Brian, and a supporter. Boy, is it, brother. This was the biggest defensive uncommitted target left on the board. Notre Dame was able to finish this one out.
Ryan, it was a wild ride, man. And we're going to get into whole backstory. We're going to share a lot with y'all today. As of yesterday, I had no idea what he was going to do. I woke up this morning and didn't know what he was going to do. As of earlier in the week, talking to my sources around the Notre Dame program, it was kind of like 50-50 at best. You know, nobody knew what he was going to do. You hear all these. There was a lot of confidence coming from the Ohio State side about how they were going to get him, and they felt good about it, and rightfully so to a degree, Ryan, because for a very long time this was Ohio State's to lose. I mean, this has been his leader for 2 years, and Notre Dame made great work. You always felt a lot more confident about this one than maybe even some people I know at Notre Dame did, which we'll get into, but got sort of this morning, I know you reached out to a couple people. Kyngstonn wasn't talking. You reached out to a couple people that had heard that this was the deal. I finally got a hold of the people that I knew and found out that he had called all the staffs and made the decision. He was coming to Notre Dame. So this is one of those ones, and we're going to get into how it played out, Ryan. But at the end of the day, this was a huge one, and it was a different deal. This is a different kind of win for Notre Dame, Ryan, because it's not a kid that Notre Dame got on first. Did you publish the post yet on the board?
I'm still working on it. It was a little tight here. Yeah.
So Ryan will have a post on the board here very soon, but one of the things he'll point it out is Notre Dame did not offer Kyngstonn until a year after Ohio State and USC, basically, because he missed his whole sophomore year with a knee injury. That was also kind of during Notre Dame's transition into Marcus Freeman as the D coordinator in 2021. Then, of course, dealing with becoming the head coach and all of that type of stuff. And Notre Dame had been playing catch-up for a long time. Now, they made themselves a legitimate contender here, but Ohio State was considered the team to beat the entire time, except for about a week after the visits happened, where USC was getting a lot of the pub, or at least coming out of the USC visit for sure. And there was a ton of pressure on him to stay in state. Some of the Ohio State and USC people were even saying after the visits, Ryan, that this was a USC-Ohio State battle, which you and I knew was bunk. Notre Dame was always in it. But nobody really thought Notre Dame was going to win this one. And they did. And we're going to get into kind of how it played out. But this is one of those ones, Ryan, where this is a huge, huge staff effort. A lot of people went into this. But there's one thing that I can say with 100% certainty. If Marcus Freeman is not the head coach, and if Marcus Freeman doesn't put the work in he put in the last couple months, especially the last month with this recruitment, this kid's celebrating a commitment to the Buckeyes today. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it, because I had said recently, because someone asked about Kyngstonn and if Notre Dame was able to get Kyngstonn, like who are the big reasons why? And I think that there were a few people on the staff that you could definitely look at and say you give a big assist to them, right? Like you talk about Al Washington and his previous relationship with him at Ohio State.
Huge. And that continued at Notre Dame too. I mean, Coach Washington played a big role in this at Notre Dame as well. Correct.
Yep. Absolutely. And you talk about Chad Bowden, and I mean, we can include Chad in every single recruitment because he is that grinder, right? And he obviously had a big part of this one as well. You could talk about, I know after he got back from his official visit, Kyngstonn had talked to me a lot about Max Bulla and the opportunity he had to sit down with him, watch film, really dig into his background, talk X's and O's with him, talk about how he'd be used at Notre Dame. So I think Max Bulla also got a little bit of an assist here, but you are correct. It starts and ends with Marcus Freeman because there was some ground to make up in this one. Like you said, I mean, Ohio State had offered a year beforehand. USC had offered a year beforehand. That was obviously his Final Three, counting Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was able to cut the gap, take the lead, and then get the lead back at the end here, obviously. So massive job by this Notre Dame staff. Marcus Freeman, again, just kind of changed the fortunes of the linebacker group in 2024 a little bit, right? Like there was a lot of question marks around that position. With Kyngstonn now in the fold, it's a lot more clarity to that position moving forward. And Notre Dame continues their hot streak of 3 straight classes with some impact linebackers, in my opinion.
Yep. You know, you look at this one, Ryan, and you look at how it played out. I'll give a lot of, I mean, obviously Marcus Freeman just really closing on this. Notre Dame, we can't get into specifics, but let's just say the Notre Dame network had a big influence in this one as well. The ability of Freeman and the staff to lay out what it means to graduate from Notre Dame as an athlete and life after that played a huge role in this thing. They did a great job there. And one of the things that was important to this one, Ryan, is Notre Dame didn't use all their kind of bullets at once, right? Yeah. They didn't kind of like, let's throw everything at them, right? The fun, you know, and then hope that that's enough. They really had a plan that got implemented. You talk about last fall, Chad Bowden going out to St. John Bosco games. You know, the Notre Dame staff getting on the road. Washington went and saw him. Freeman went and saw him at one point in time. Al Golden went and saw him at one point in time. Chad went and saw him. During sometimes he was allowed out on the road. You look at the fact that they included different coaches at different times to kind of give it a different angle, you know? So like Coach Washington was really heavily involved, and then they kind of backed him off a little bit to get Coach Golden more involved. Then they got Coach Bulla involved. Then down the stretch, Coach Washington got re-involved again, and it was strategic. It wasn't like Coach Washington decided, oh, next month I'm not going to talk to him. It was strategic. It was, you know, let's kind of get these different things. But the one consistent really over the last several months, and especially down the stretch, was Marcus Freeman selling his vision for him. Like, look, yes, no matter who the coach is, you're coming to play for a program in the way that we believe in this program and the way that I'm going to be building this program, because that's the one constant that you can guarantee is going to be here is me. And that was a huge, huge sell on top of the whole staff ever. But the strategy in which they kind of put this together was one of the best I've seen Notre Dame do, where there was clear – like, hey, we have to go about this differently. We just can't have 5 coaches overwhelming him all at once. Because you know this, Ryan, the way Kyngstonn is, that would have been a turnoff to him. Yes, they had to be smart about who is going to be kind of stepping it up at this time, who's going to be engaging with him at this time, and really making sure they were smart about it. Kudos to Chad Bowden and his staff for making sure everybody was on the same page. And then kudos to all the assistant coaches under Coach Freeman as well. Al Washington, Al Golden, right? He talked to you about Al Golden during this period too, and sort of the way that Al Golden talked about, you know, how they're going to use him in the defense. Max Bulla, man, this is just such a huge, huge win, Ryan. And it's one of those ones that, as I said before, this is very different from a lot of Notre Dame big wins, because this is not one where it was get on them early and hold on for dear life.
Sure.
and that's what makes this big. And then when you add into the fact that outside of linemen, and the offensive lineman and the occasional tight end, you just came from behind to beat a program that has dominated you for kids like this for a long time.
Yep. And
you also beat your arch rival, who he was in their backyard.
Yep.
That only adds, Ryan, to how enormous this is for Notre Dame.
Well, I think that's the 2 biggest points there is that I would say for me, Ohio State and USC had 2 of the easier sells for as far as comparative to Notre Dame in this class, from the sense of Ohio State was first. Ohio State has a linebacker coach that he was very familiar with, obviously, in James Laurinaitis. They have a little bit more of the consistency as far as over the last couple years, because Notre Dame obviously got in a little bit late due to the injury. USC, backyard. And we know that there was a great push, especially when he took his official visit to, hey, man, like, people around, kind of just, the miscellaneous people around, like, hey, stay home, help Alex Grinch and Lincoln Riley, get USC football back to the top. And, that great pitch,
Troy
right?
Polamalu on campus during his visit, man. Like, they pulled out all the stops.
They took out the big guns for sure. But I think that Notre Dame, for me, Brian, it's like, I think it was the authenticity, of course. But I really think that at the end of the day, I knew that Kyngstonn wasn't going to be just push to the glamour and the glitz of this whole thing, right? You know, the
Yeah.
easy flash of USC, the flashiness of Ohio State to a degree. It was always because again, you know, there's some recruits that just kind of feed you the line, right? And then there's some guys that you can tell actually believe what they're saying, right? About what's important to them. And Kyngston's criteria was always consistent. It was always, I am a faith-bearing man. I want to have my spirituality entrusted in where I'm going. I want to also be challenged academically. I want to be challenged as a football player, and I want to be developed as the best possible person and football player that I could be. There is no place out of that final three that does that better than University of Notre Dame as far as checking every single box. So being able to check all those boxes and beating a program like Ohio State that does have a lot of momentum, does have a lot of recruiting momentum, has done a tremendous job beating a team like that for a player that Ohio State wanted. Don't let there be any, fanfare of like,
and did a good job with. Right,
yes,
Ryan? Like, this isn't a thing where Ohio State or USC dropped the ball. If you're mad at their coaches, look, they did a great job with this. They did. They didn't drop the ball. They didn't take Notre Dame they didn't overlook Notre Dame. They didn't do. This is just one that Notre Dame won. And sometimes that happens. You know, Notre Dame has recruited kids hard in the past. We've talked about this with Elijah Rushing. Notre Dame did everything they could have done to get that kid that possibly were willing to do. And the kid just made other decisions, right? This is one of those ones for Ohio State and USC. They didn't drop the ball. They didn't do anything wrong here. This is just a situation where, Notre Dame was able to sell it all, Ryan. And I wanted to say something else to get you to respond to this too, Ryan. It's because everything you heard Kyngstonn say, you hear all the time. I care about academics, care about faith. And there were times during this where I didn't feel good about it just because of what I'm hearing from my sources. And Ryan just kept saying, I don't know, man. I know what everybody's saying, but I just feel like this kid is legit when he says it. He means it. And you always felt better about where Notre Dame stood in this recruitment compared to myself or even my sources at Notre Dame, Ryan. And it was because you read this kid correctly. When this kid says these things are important to me, I believe him. Where Ryan, sometimes when you hear that, you're like, yeah, okay. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about Kyngstonn was it never changed, right? Like the criteria never changed. Some players, some recruits, you can definitely see through it because it's like they told me this criteria the first time, and then the second time there was just different criteria on there, and it just seemed kind of wishy-washy and not thorough. Kyngstonn is thorough, and his family is thorough, and he comes from a program that is incredibly thorough with how they prepare their student athletes. So yeah, I believed Kyngstonn pretty much from the start, the first couple of times, because I actually had a chance to meet him in person he was at the All-American Bowl down in San Antonio when Peyton Woodyard made his commitment to the University of Georgia. And there's just something different about him. Like there really is, and I think the difference is one of the reasons that he might align to Notre Dame a little bit better, the uniqueness, but there's just something that he's not. I just never got the impression that recruiting was a tool for him to find the best fit possible. It wasn't a tool to get the most followers on Twitter and to get all this pub and to, get all these fans to follow him. It was strictly to try to find the best fit for him and the best home. And the fact that every single time it was always about his faith, his development, his comforts, and playing high level football. Those things just kind of always intertwined and were always super consistent. So yeah, there's some kids that read you the line, read you everything's great and every team is the best team ever. But I think Kyngstonn's one of those young men that he lived what he was preaching, which I think is why he ends up at the University of Notre Dame, because he's a very mature 18-year-old. Like we'll just leave it at that, right? Like, this is a different type of cat.
And a kid who is that way because of the manner in which he was raised.
Yep.
And that's something that I thought was one of the more brilliant strategies that Marcus Freeman and Al Washington had the biggest impact with. And that was winning over mom and dad.
Yeah.
Like that's Ryan. I mean, you can explain more on that, but them winning over mom and dad, to me, if they do not get him, no matter what he might have felt about his faith and whatever else, if mom and dad weren't completely on board with Notre Dame, I don't want to say that this is where they wanted him to go, because I think that would be taken a little too far. But I think that there was a lot of maybe, yes, we kind of think this might be a great place for him, even more so than others. Yes. Yeah. So that was a big part of this, Ryan. And something also that you've been saying for a while is also what gave you optimism, why you really felt Notre Dame was going to win this one, even when almost everybody else that I know didn't think Notre Dame they were going to be close, but it wasn't just going. It just wasn't going to be quite enough.
Well, he had said, obviously, well, I'll say it like this. Mom's opinion is very important to Kyngstonn, especially, his parents in general, but his families in general, but mom's especially is very important. And there's a lot of players that say that as well, right? Like,
Right.
mom matters and sure. But Kyngstonn, the minute that I really believed it and I felt like it was a big sticking point to his decision was when he was about to go on his official visits, Brian, and he didn't talk about his experience on that visit coming up, right? He said, the official visits are most important because my family has never been to a couple of these places and I need their inputs to make a great decision. So I think that when you talk about that layer of this whole thing, how the official visits were more for his family than it actually was for him, because he had been to USC, Ohio State, Notre Dame multiple times at that point, multiple times. But it was that trip, especially to South Bend, was not for Kyngstonn. It was for his mom and his dad, who had never been there, who had never talked to the coaches face to face in that type of a setting, and had never experienced South Bend, Indiana. So that was a big sticking point for me, is that family was involved. It was ultimately his decision in the end.
Right.
But yes, his mom, his dad, his family, their opinions absolutely did matter in this one.
Yeah. And I think the staff did a really good job, Ryan, of winning them over throughout the process, but it really got sealed during the official. That was the thing. And this was Freeman and Washington, from what I'm told, were the two drivers of that connection because of Washington with the longevity, because again, when he got offered in 2021 by Ohio State, the guy that offered him the scholarship from Ohio State, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, was Al Washington, who at the time was the linebackers coach at Notre Dame. So there was a lot of people that thought, well, now that Laurinaitis is going to Ohio State, that's going to hurt Notre Dame. And I'm like, no. That's not the thing that I'm worried about, because the guy he's had the longest relationship with is at Notre Dame. And that's really what it boiled down to. So this was really one of those ones, Ryan, where you say staff effort was imperative to win this one. But as we said before, this is one of those recruitments where you say, you ask yourself, can Marcus Freeman still win these huge battles as the head coach, especially at linebacker, like he would have when he was still the D coordinator and linebackers coach? And this is evidence of that, Ryan, because there's nothing about how this recruitment went down that should make you say Notre Dame was going to be the choice, right? As far as just the time frame, and you're going to lay out the timeline on the board here in a little bit. And that's what Ryan's working. If you guys see what he's working on while I'm talking, that's what he's working on, is trying to get that on the message board with just a little bit of the backstory. But
just doesn't format that well to the message board. How I'm trying it right now.
It really doesn't. If you publish it, Ryan, I can go in there and kind of clean it up while we're going through some of this stuff. Just to get that in there, because when you copy and paste, it does. Yeah, there's some stuff you have to do. In the
spacing is all off right now. So
I'll go ahead and knock that out. But
But
yeah, this was a big one. I really wish I could share some of the stuff that I was told in the last week. But like I said, Ryan, even early this week, even as a few days ago, there just wasn't a lot of confidence that this was going to be the pick, just because he was saying all the right things. But there was one thing that I was told that gave them sort of like this is why we're going to keep fighting, because he kept reaching out to them and asking questions. Right. What about this? What about that? If I pick Notre Dame, what would this be? What would this look like, throughout the entire process? And the fact that he was engaging them is the one thing that gave them a glimmer of hope of, hey, we're still in this. Let's keep fighting. And they made some tough choices, Ryan. There were some guys that they might have been able to go in on the last couple of weeks when it looked like it was trending away, to say, hey, let's just cover our bases. Yeah. But they said, no, this is the kind of kid, this is the kid we want. This is the kid that we need. And they stayed on it, and they won it in the end. And man, just a massive, massive pickup for Notre Dame. And I can't stress again, like, other than Harry Hiestand, nobody at Notre Dame has really had any kind of consistent success against Ohio State the last decade. They've
No.
won a kid here and there. Like Sean Crawford was a kid that Ohio State got on late that Notre Dame beat them for. But there just aren't a lot of kids that they've been able to say, hey, look, they went toe to toe. Ohio State wanted that kid as much as Notre Dame wanted him, and
Right.
Notre Dame got him. I mean, Garrett Stover is an example in this class of a kid that Notre Dame really wanted. They didn't get. Obviously, we know about Justin Scott. If Aaron Scott picks them, he'll be another one. But this is just Notre Dame's had a tough time beating Ohio State. This is the kind of thing that you need. And especially when you're talking about, here's another angle of this too, Ryan. The two teams Notre Dame both beat Notre Dame this past season by 11.
Right. Yeah.
And Notre Dame lost to Marshall and Stanford. I mean, that's what Notre Dame is coming off of. It was really hard to sell this vision of how it's going to pan out when that's the reality of it. But they did a good job of selling that vision. And there was this is something you had noted too to me when we were talking. There was a consistency to their messaging. They didn't keep throwing stuff against the wall, hoping they could find the thing that worked for him. They had a message they believed in, and throughout the entire process, that stayed consistent. And I think that also mattered to Kyngstonn. And when you have a kid like him and the way his family is, that consistency is gonna be important.
100%. Yeah, he is one of the most meticulous kids that I've ever talked to, as far as he knows what he wants. He was trying to find it, and he was doing his absolute best to be able to find the best reality for him. Like, this isn't fluff. This isn't shock value. This isn't, all the glitz and glam. Like, this was for Kyngstonn, right? Like, this was the best for his future, what he perceived to be the best for his future. So yes, he was very level-headed. He was very meticulous. I can't say enough good things about this young man. And I wasn't, this was just a situation where you talk to him, and when you get to know him, you understand why Notre Dame is so high on him, and why I believe that, and we have good reason to believe this, that if he chose somewhere else other than Notre Dame would have kept recruiting him, because he's a Notre Dame kid. Like, he just is. Like, he's a kid that fits the program and would thrive at a place like the University of Notre Dame. So everything involved, man, it's a great day for all parties involved. I think Kyngstonn made a decision best for him. That wasn't the easy decision either. It wasn't. And that's why you've been hearing recently buzz for USC at some points, buzz for Ohio State at some points, and not as much for Notre Dame. Like, this wasn't the popular pick, but it was the best pick for Kyngstonn and his family and his future playing football. And I think making those hard decisions is not an easy thing, right? Like, Jeremiah Love last cycle, choosing Notre Dame over a couple of the offers that he had from other schools was not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, but that's what makes them unique, and that's what makes them different. And I think that's why Kyngstonn is going to fit in great at University of Notre Dame, because he sees a different perspective than I think a lot of kids would.
Let's also say this. There's going to be, and I saw it in the chat, somebody talking about, I'm still nervous about this one, and what if one of these schools throws a big bag at him? Let me just say this. Number one, in recruiting, there are no guarantees. Nowadays, even when you sign with the new rules, Ryan, right? I mean, so you can live your life in, constant worry about a kid decommitting, or you can just enjoy the fact that the kid's in the class. But I'll say this. There have already been huge offers on the table if he wanted them. I don't want to get into it, but I'll just say this. There's one school in particular is among his finalists that offered a really substantial package.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, Ryan, as you said, I think that was something that kind of caused him to say, hold on a second. That's not easy money to just brush off.
Sure.
But he did. At the end of the day, he did, because he understood that you're making this commitment. The long-term value is a lot more important than the short-term gain.
Yes.
And so I'm just not overly concerned about it. I think the only way you could see Notre Dame falter on this one, as far as I can see it, Ryan, is if just the season goes horribly wrong or bad. Right. Which, but again, there are no guarantees, but that's just not one with this particular young man that I'm overly concerned about, just knowing who he is. And I honestly thought, Ryan, sometimes that you had just convinced yourself that they were going to get him because how much you like talking to the kid, because he's a great kid. And you didn't want to, have to be like, well, he's going somewhere else. You know what I mean? So
Uh,
Huge win for Notre
well,
Dame on
well,
this one, no
and
question.
think about where he's getting pulled from, right? I mean, we talked about the USC's backyard stuff, right, Brian? But one of his best friends just committed to USC as well. Marcellus
Right,
Williams committed to USC. His
right.
other best friend, Peyton Woodyard, is going to play SEC football at Georgia. He also has a scholarship offer from the University of Georgia, from the University of
And Ohio
Alabama,
State.
and
Yep.
Ohio State. I mean, like there's a lot of pulls in different directions, and I think that for me, when you ask who's the kid that's more likely to be flipped, it's the kid that isn't like him, right? And again, anything could happen. I'm not saying that there's a kid that's unflippable. I'm just saying that there are different layers to how likely a kid is to be flipped, and Kyngstonn just doesn't seem like one of those kids to like. Dude, yeah, like to get to that
Yeah.
point. I mean, well, again, we'll see. Notre Dame has to play good football
Yeah.
this year to finalize
There
everything.
are
to
no
your point,
guarantees in
but
recruiting, but some you look at, Ryan, you say, I'm just not worried about that one with
right.
that kid,
It's going
right?
to be
Like
hard. It's going to be
that's why
hard.
when
Yeah.
everybody, it's like you know who he reminds me a lot of is Jeremiah Love.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
As far as different backgrounds and all that, but like Jeremiah just had his vision of this is what matters to me.
Yes.
And it really, the other stuff doesn't matter to me. The other fluff, all the things that people say, well, this kid might flip because they're going to offer big money at him. I don't know of a kid in last year's class that signed with Notre Dame who had a bigger offer than Jeremiah Love. We're talking seven figure offers, right? And so it just didn't matter. He had a vision for this is what I want. So when these other schools came with offers and promises of this, that, and the other, Jeremiah said, yeah, but you can't offer me this, this, and this. Only Notre Dame can.
Right.
And I think that ultimately is something that sealed the deal for Kyngstonn as well. And it's why that once I would have said this, I would have felt much better about the potential of him flipping back to Notre Dame had he picked someone else. But even then, I wouldn't have felt great about it because he just doesn't strike me as the kind of young man that is going to go back, barring something dramatic changing.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Like bad season. Marcus Freeman leaves, something
Coaching
that unforeseen.
change, right? Yeah.
Right. Which we just don't see either of those two things happening. So I feel good about this one. Again, long way to December, but this is a big one. Ryan, let's talk about the class impact a little bit of what this means. Let's get into the nitty gritty now. We've talked about the backstory. We've given the praise where it needs to be. Marcus Freeman crushed this one. Al Washington did a great job. Al Golden deserves a high five for the role that he played in this, right? It was more of a complimentary role, but that's okay. That's okay. You know, Max Bulla getting involved late, Chad Bowden and his crew, like this is one of those ones. And the Notre Dame network, and I don't know that we're allowed to kind of talk about who, but there were definitely he reached out to and talked to several former Notre Dame players.
Yes.
You know, that we would all know and recognize and love, right?
Which is just I mean, again, we're talking about it being different and being unique. Like that's one of the signs of being different and being unique, right? Like he didn't want just his vantage point. He didn't want his perspective. He didn't want just his mom and his dad's perspective. He didn't want just Coach Freeman's perspective and the other head coaches that were involved in this guy. He wanted alumni. He wanted assistant coaches. He wanted fans. He wanted it all, man, which I think is why he's a little bit of a different cat. Just
because he made this decision by taking everything into account and was thoughtful with it. And honestly, Ryan, genuinely, this is one of the few times I can't remember the last time actually probably Emil Wagner was the last time that Notre Dame got a kid that on the morning we woke up, it was a decision, the Notre Dame coaches didn't know that they were going to get him. Like, I think Emil Wagner was the last time. This doesn't happen very often. It doesn't. And because he didn't call and tell all the coaches till today, because I honestly think there's twofold. One is I think that he wanted to not let it get out, right? Like, you know, as best he could, which it's impossible nowadays because the schools that don't get him are now telling everybody we didn't get him. And then it gets out that way, right?
He did it about as well as I've ever seen a kid do it though, man. I was like literally, I mean, to your point, Brian, I have been this way over the last couple of days. I literally said this on the live show on Friday. People were asking about Kyngstonn. I'm like, guys, nothing has changed on my end. I think it's a 50-50 right now. Like, I think it could go either way. And I know people were probably like, what? How do you not know? And it's just like, no one knows.
As of yesterday, Ryan, he had not told them. He did not call and tell all. My understanding is he called the USC and Ohio State first and told them he wasn't coming, I believe is how it went down, and then called Notre Dame and told him he was coming.
Yeah.
But I also think part of it too, Ryan, I don't know that he really was for sure that this was the movie he was going to make until maybe the last 24 to 48 hours. I really think he took on to it. Now, USC has been out for a little bit. They were an early surge after the visits. There was that brief period of about a week that we were hearing USC made a big, let's just call it a push for him. And but after that, it went right back to Ohio State and Notre Dame. And it was Notre Dame and Ohio State. He had actually it's been a two-man race for a while, and everybody knew it. So USC knew they were out, at least as of 2 to 3 weeks ago, I would say, Ryan. So everybody knew it was going to come down to these two. So just a big one for the Notre Dame staff. But let's talk about what this means for the class.
Yeah.
You look at where Notre Dame was, and you talk about the recruiting they had the last 2 years of linebacker. Notre Dame has recruited linebacker phenomenally well the last 2 years since Marcus Freeman arrived. However, poor recruiting by previous staffs meant two things. Number one is some of those linebackers needed to be taken other places, right? So you've got Josh Burnham and Junior Tuihalamaka, a pair of top 100 linebackers in the 2022 class, are now defensive ends. You completely struck out at linebacker in 2020 because everybody knew Jordan Patel was eventually going to be a Viper. You had two linebackers in the 2021 class. They're both gone, although there's a chance that Kahanukia comes back after his mission. That's still, I believe, the family's plan is for him to come back. But you were still short on numbers because you only got two guys. And then you really only have two linebackers left from the 2022 class, and Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Snead. So even with last year's great three-man class, you still needed another strong three-man class, Ryan. And so number one, from a pure numbers need, this was big just from a depth number standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, and you needed it, right? Like you needed it, to your point. I mean, with the position changes that have happened and the defections, obviously, of a couple guys and the uncertainty of Kia, like I'll just put it like that, right? Like I expect him to come back, but at the end of the day, he hasn't played football for 2 years. So like, who knows what you even expect from him when he comes back? But you needed this. And Brian, one of the positions that because I know Kyngston's a kid that can play multiple spots, right? Like he's not necessarily just a Mike. He could play Will. He could play multiple spots on the second level. But one position that I would say there's still a little bit of a question mark as far as what the long term is going to look like is Mike linebacker. Like I think that's one spot that I look at and I say, like I think Drake Bowen's going to be that guy, but he's still making that transition, obviously, and Preston Zinter, is he going to be that guy eventually? There's still some question marks there. I think Kyngstonn, for everything that we've been talking about the missteps and the question marks of linebacker recruiting, he is the one known commodity that you needed at this position. Yes, you need to hit numbers, but you also need to hit a good number, right? Like taking a third linebacker that's just a solid or an upside pick, like that's not going to cut it, man. Like you needed a guy that is not only a number, but is also an impact number. A guy that's going to come in day one and be like, yeah, he belongs here. Like there's no question.
And you needed a true inside backer, right? Yeah. Like, and that's the thing is, I don't know that him or Drake or Jaden Alsbury or Nolan Ziegler or any of the guys they've landed were pure Mikes or Wills. And I think that's good because if you're a pure Mike, that means you're probably not athletic enough to be an impact player at Notre Dame. That's what I would say, the way that they play defense. And you look at a guy like Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak, I think this is a big impact on them as well, because you took a flyer on two linebackers that have verified 4.5 40 times, but are very raw and a bit, lower floor, high ceiling guys. Would you say that's fair, Ryan?
Very fair.
Teddy they can talk to him all they want about him maybe being a will linebacker someday. Maybe he can be, but right now he's 195-pound string bean, right? So right now you look at him and the way he plays the game, rover, screams rover.
Well, Brian, to strengthen your point, literally I talked to Carson Hobbs about this on a podcast and he was like, wait, Teddy's a linebacker? I thought he was a safety. I'm like, yeah,
bingo.
Man, exactly.
Exactly. And so you look at Bodie Cahoon, that kid is yet to play a full year of linebacker. Like Ryan, you've documented this at Irish Breakdown. He started the season at safety and then eventually moved to linebacker. He's a high upside kid, but he's still learning that position. He's a lower floor, really high ceiling guy. If you'd have gone into this class with those guys as your 1 and 2, that's a little shaky, right? There's some boom or bust there. This is one of the highest floor linebackers in the entire country, if not the highest floor linebacker in the entire country. And so now in a year where the linebacker class is not good, we've been saying this for months, it's not a great linebacker class. You got one of the best, and a guy that Notre Dame viewed as their number one inside backer on their board for a year. Would you say that's accurate, right, Ryan? That's, I think, kind of laid out in your thing. They stayed on him, and they get their number one inside backer, and now you took a flyer on two really high upside kids, and these other two where now they look like the complementary pieces to him, which adds impact. And it's the second year in a row that Notre Dame has signed a 3-man linebacker class that can play together. Because in last year's class, you could put Drake at Mike and Zinter at Will, and then Jaden at Rover. You could put Preston Zinter at Mike, Drake at Will. You could even consider having Drake at Rover. So, I mean, there's all types of ways you can play that trio together. And then this trio actually, to me, projects even a little bit more naturally with Teddy as a Rover and then Kyngstonn and Brody Cahoon inside, whether whoever you want to have as the Mike or the Will. I personally like him as more as a Mike, just because the way he moves, and we'll get into that when we break down the film. But this is one of those big things, Ryan, where it's not just about numbers. It's not just about talent. It's, can you play them all together? Can they get on the field together? Can your best linebacker in this year's class, which is Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, get on the field with your two studs from last year, Jaden Osbury and Drake Bowen? And the answer is yes.
The answer is absolutely yes.
Yes, he can. Yeah. Can he get on the field with Jalen Sneed? Yes, he can. Because if you sign 3 stud linebackers 3 years in a row, and whoever you pick as the stud in 22, whether it's Jalen Sneed or Josh Burnham or Nolan Ziegler, whoever you view as the number one guy last year, Jaden Osbury or Drake Bowen, and now Kyngstonn is the number one here, can they play together? Are they all Mikes, right? Or Wills? The fact is this is a kid that can not only play with the kids in his class, but can play side by side Drake Bowen or Jaden Osbury or Jalen Sneed in the future. That's huge. Because now you're putting together a group of guys that can play together. And then you know who else is really happy about this decision, Ryan, and the commitments they've landed at linebacker in the last 2 classes? You know, this is really fun. Marty Biaggi. There's no question. This guy's going to be like, are you serious? Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa is the slowest linebacker you guys are recruiting in this class? Seriously? Okay. I'm really happy I made the decision to come to Notre Dame. I mean, think about that, Ryan. That's huge. In the last 2 years, I would argue only he's faster than maybe only one linebacker, and that's probably Preston Zinter, just pure speed, and that says a lot because this kid can run.
Yeah, Preston Zinter could run a little bit too, which is pretty wild.
That's why I said maybe. Maybe.
I mean, it's a great problem to have, obviously, right? And obviously, saying that very sarcastically because it's not a problem. It's what people want to have, and I think that we talk about it a lot, but not enough people talk about the fit thing, right? It's like wide receiver, offensive line, defensive line. You got to make sure you're not recruiting the same guy, the cookie cutters, right? I mean, because
Ryan, if you sign the 5 best offensive linemen in the country and they're all centers and guards, you're not going to have the best 5-man offensive line in the country.
Exactly.
If you sign 4 defensive linemen and they're all nose guards, guess what? You're not going to have an elite defensive line. You're going to have a bunch of freaking nose guards.
And that goes the same way of offensive line. It's like, all the great, 6'7" left tackles of all time. It's like, who's going to play center? Like, is anybody going to be able to play center? Like, does anybody have leverage ability in that regard? So, yeah, I think that I look at it and I say, if I'm just talking 2024 class of how am I going to line up today, for me personally, it's going to be Kyngstonn at Mike, Bodie at Will, and then Rizak at Rover. And that's easy. All those spots as well. You don't have to force a round peg into a square hole with any of those players. Like, they would be comfortable because that's literally roles that they play right now in high school, and they'd be able to do those things. So yes, I think that fit matters extremely, to the highest of levels. And the other big thing is that you're getting versatile players as well, because there is a little bit of flexibility. Drake Bowen can play multiple spots. Preston Zinter can play multiple spots to a degree. Jaden Osbury might be a guy that can eventually play multiple spots as his body develops. You're talking about Kyngstonn, ability to play both Mike and Will on the college level. You talk about Bodie Cahoon as a 6'2", 220-pound linebacker that can run 4.54. That's could potentially play Mike as his body continues to develop. If Teddy Rizak's body can hold the weight, maybe he's a Will down the line. There's a lot of versatility, There's a lot of ways to make things fit, and I think that matters extremely well. And for the linebacker coaches, for Al Golden and Max Bulla, they're going to have a lot of options on the second
Yep.
level due to what Marcus Freeman has done and do what they're been able to do in 2024. This one commitment has completely, in my opinion, and if people disagree, that's fine. You're allowed to disagree. Sure. But in my opinion, getting Kyngstonn into this class has completely altered the perspective of 2024 linebacker recruiting at Notre Dame. Because let's be honest with ourselves. The last two, with Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak, there is projection. There is, right. Which means that there's a possibility that they don't hit their ceilings. The possibility that they don't develop properly. And you could have been sitting here of like, wow, that's not a good linebacker class. But now with Kyngstonn,
or risky, at the very best, really risky linebacker class. Right.
But now you have the floor of Kyngstonn combined with two high ceilings in the other spots. Then I look at it and say, this is now a good to very good linebacker class. I'm good with it. Like, I have no questions about linebacker at this point in the 2024 class, because I think the one thing that we forget, and we always forget this, is that these kids still have a senior year to play, right? We don't know how good Bodie Cahoon is going to be when he signs on the dotted line. We have no idea how good Teddy Rizak is going to be when he signs on the dotted line. If Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa is just as good as he is today when he signs on the dotted line, I'm happy. I'm good to go there, right? So, yes, I think Notre Dame is in very good shape at linebacker, and this has completely changed the fortune of the outlook of the linebacker group in 2024, because it was looking bleak at points. There's ups and downs. There's no doubt about it. The process wasn't great at times, in my opinion, but at the end of the day, you got the guy that you thought was the must get on the board, and Notre Dame was able to accomplish that. So we're all good today.
They were always fighting an uphill battle with Kyngstonn. That's the thing. They were always fighting an uphill battle. And the fact that they were able to actually get this one done speaks volumes, like you said, Ryan, about where this staff is now from a recruiting prowess, what this staff is capable of. I think this is one of those ones that you say, this is kind of a statement win, right? And you've had some big wins in recent seasons, right? But some of the big wins you could say, okay, well, Drake Bowen was a huge win. And I would argue that Drake Bowen still has the highest ceiling of any linebacker they've landed in the last 2 years, right? 23 and 24. That's my personal opinion, right? But you look at it and say, but Drake was from Indiana. Well, not originally, blah, blah, but he was in Indiana, right? And so, they were able to get that done. That was big, but he's an Indiana kid. You look at, you could look at Preston Zinter, Massachusetts kid. You look at Jalen Sneed. Well, his head coach is one of Marcus Freeman's best friends, right? There was always sort of that reason that you could justify, well, maybe this wasn't as big of a win as whatever, right? There is nothing like that with this one. This is simply, you went toe to toe with a school that's been kicking your butt, and you got it done, because this is the kind of win you have to start doing more regularly. And maybe this is the start of something new. But here's the thing where it helps, Ryan. When you look at future years, when Notre Dame is recruiting against Ohio State, you're going to have some kids on this roster that can say, hey, man, you got to do what's best for you. Yep. But let me explain to you why I picked Notre Dame. Because what you'll find is most of these kids they'll push their school, but they don't push the way that coaches do, because most kids understand, hey, you got to do what is best for you. But when you can say that, but then also say, but here's why I did not do Ohio State, or, and not like from a negative standpoint, like, oh, they sucked or they did this wrong, but it's like, here's the benefit that Notre Dame gave me that I just couldn't get anywhere else. That matters. That stuff really matters. And you're talking about a highly ranked kid from the premier program in the country right now. Yep. That's going to have some big sway, some very big sway. For Notre Dame when it comes to being able to recruit big boys. I mean, that's the reality, because that's where we're at, Ryan. Like, this staff has done a good job of evaluations, finding the Caleb Smiths and the Logan Saldates and the Teddy Rizaks and the Bodie Cahoons, like the Logan Thomases, the Cole Mullins. Like, they're doing a great job of finding those under the radar gems that have impact talent. But at some point in time, you've also got to be able to go toe-to-toe with Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia and beat them, because it has a twofold impact. Not only do you land a good player, but you keep them from landing a good player.
100%. Yeah.
is if Notre Dame would have found a kid with Kyngstonn ceiling somewhere else. Let's say Bradley Shaw had Kyngstonn ceiling and maybe not the floor, but eventually he ends up being a really good player. You can say, well, hey, look, great job. You found this diamond in the rough, but Ohio State still got Kyngstonn. Now it's like you're getting your Kyngstonn, but Ohio State isn't. And that's a huge part of this. This is that double gap closing type of scenario that you and I talk about, Ryan. It's not only did you get a big time player, but did you keep the teams you're chasing from getting one as well? And that's what they did with this recruitment.
And I think the layer that you hit on, Brian, which I talk about all the time, is Notre Dame is starting to tap into more pipelines of schools that all they know is winning. And that matters to me. I mean,
that's
we
a
talked
great
about
point, Ryan.
I mean, we talked about 2023 with like Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores and those types of guys, Cooper Flanagan. Like they come from schools that the expectation is to win and win state championships and to not do anything else.
Ryan, in the last two classes, they've landed a kid from Bosco and De La Salle in the last two classes.
I know.
And another kid from Folsom in California. Those are the big time programs in that state. I mean, they haven't tapped into modern day yet, but you know what? Those modern day kids are taking notice. Oh, dude,
and there's a lot of 2025 modern day kids. So, yes.
Their entire secondary is basically being recruited by Notre Dame.
Their entire defense, man. Linebackers, edge rushers. Like, it's really crazy, nuts. Man. It is. Really but, nuts. I mean, it really is, Brian, because someone just said it in the chat, and I agree completely. Like, Notre Dame hasn't really tapped into the St. John Bosco pipeline. They haven't. And the one thing I know about Kyngstonn is we talk about the floor. Why is Kingstonn's floor so high? Because it's not going to be unique or different to him, right? He's going to come to Notre Dame and he's going to expect to be an impact player and to win football games. That's going to be the expectation. You know why? Because that's all he knows, man. Like that's all he knows. Jaden Greathouse. Why are people shocked that Jaden Greathouse looks like he's going to play a lot as a freshman and he was really good down the stretch of spring? Why are we shocked? We shouldn't be shocked because for that kid, won 52 straight games in high school on the 6A level in Texas.
Ryan, I would say we've both said the highest ceiling at the receiver core is Braylon James. Like it's not really close in my opinion. But what was the argument you and I had? Who's going to be most ready as a freshman, Rico or Jaden? Well, guess what? They're both showing really good, that because look where they came from. Yes. Right? I mean, that stuff matters. Yep. It's not the end all be all. You can find guys from other programs who aren't that way. Jeremiah Love comes from a big time program in Missouri, just dominates winning state championships. I mean, there's a lot of kids like that in Notre Dame's class where you're like, these are really dominant programs. Drake Bowen comes from one of the better programs in the state of Indiana. Yep. Jaden Osbury comes from a really good program in the state of Louisiana. They're not even some of the underrated kids. Cole Mullins comes from a great program in the state of Georgia. You're starting to get more and more of these kids where Notre Dame is saying, hey, we're going to go find that sleeper kid. Logan Saldate does not play against very good competition, right? But it's not like an end all be all, but that stuff matters, especially when you're talking about what's going to be the thing that pushes you over the edge. And that's a big part of it. Also, from an evaluating the class standpoint, Ryan, obviously this is a top 100 recruit. He's a top 100 recruit on the Irish Breakdown board. He is a 4.5-star upside kid. On my board, Ryan, I don't know if you view him as a 5-star upside kid or not. I view him just slightly underneath that. 4.5 is top 50 caliber player. He was close to it. He is actually by a point, the new number one player in the defensive class on my board. He's a point ahead of Cole Mullins. And so you got Cole Mullins, Bronte Johnson is my number 1, 2, and 3 with Logan Thomas. Now all of a sudden, Ryan, we've talked about this. Now you have a really impact top 100 caliber player on all 3 levels. Defensive lineman with, in my view, Cole Mullins. You have a linebacker in Kyngstonn, then obviously Bronte Johnson is a safety. And then I would argue you have a borderline top 100 kid at corner as well in Leonard Moore, in my opinion. And you've got some, you've got some incredibly high ceiling guys like Logan Thomas, like Bryce Young, like Bodie Cahoon, like Teddy Rizak. I think I saw something where Tabron Benny Powell, a guy that you and I are not high on, had like a monster first game in a scrimmage they had, like a couple picks and like real big deal. So all of a sudden having Kyngstonn in this class, Ryan, to me, it's just one kid. And I don't mean to get too hyperbolic here, but it completely changes the outlook of what this defensive class looks like, because there would have been a big gaping hole in this class if you don't get him. And now you've hit on guys, because, like, let's be honest about something, Ryan. Notre Dame took Logan Thomas when there were still some really good Vipers on the board. They wanted Cole Mullins in a big way. Whatever you out there think of him as a player, Notre Dame views Cole Mullins as a dude, right? So Bryce Young was the guy that they've been targeting for a long time. Leonard Moore is the guy that they prioritized the minute they got on his film.
Yes.
Bronte Johnson's a kid they've been prioritizing for a long time. Kennedy Urlacher's a kid that they have been in on a long time. So now with getting Kyngstonn, you can look and say, Ryan, yes, there have been misses, no doubt. Justin Scott was a big miss. Elijah Rushing was a miss. There are different types of misses, but there's a lot of hits now and hits at different positions of guys that they have been prioritizing for a long time. Not guys they moved on after they missed someone else, but guys that they prioritized early on. That's huge to me. Huge to me.
Yeah. Well, it's a hit on a guy that maybe you shouldn't have gotten, right? I mean, because I'll say like this, Brian, because I do agree that Cole Mullins is very underrated from just the national perspective of him, right? But I look at him and I say, but Notre Dame versus the teams that have offered him, Notre Dame should win that battle. Kennedy Urlacher the same way. Notre Dame should win that battle. You're battling against the big dogs for Kyngstonn, like the big dogs.
Great point.
I mean, Alabama, Georgia, they didn't even make the top group for Kyngstonn, but they also have offered Kyngstonn. Texas has offered Kyngstonn. Some of the big
LSU,
guys,
Oklahoma, Penn State, Michigan, right? Oregon, Tennessee,
big dogs, man. And a lot of those schools that you just mentioned also
Texas
have
A&M. He visited Texas this spring too, Ryan, I believe.
He did
for an unofficial.
He did. And those also, and he also visited Miami at some point this offseason as well. So you're talking about a lot of the schools that you just said as well, Brian. They have a different pitch than what Notre Dame can give to a recruit as well. So you were fighting an uphill battle. You're fighting a battle for a kid that maybe you shouldn't have landed, if we're being honest. But
and I can say this, Ryan, with certainty. Let me just interject this. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to get this to you before you moved on to another thing. This is a kid you do not land in the previous staff. I don't mean this as a slap in the face, but they had a track record of not being willing to see recruitments like this through to the end. They would have panicked and taken some other, low kid and tried to convince everybody, no, we like this kid better. That's what they would have done in the previous staff. This staff took a risk. It took a gamble, Ryan, where a lot of linebackers have committed elsewhere, dude, like a lot of them. But they said, no, we're seeing this one through because we think this kid, it reminds me a lot of the Christian Gray recruitment last year from this standpoint. I remember when Ohio State and LSU had kind of passed Notre Dame by. And so this part's a little different because Notre Dame was the leader for Christian and then fell behind. That's a little different here. But I remember talking with someone and the point was made to me is like, look, we're not going to stop recruiting this kid because at the end of the day, we believe he's a Notre Dame kid. He just doesn't know it yet. And I think that's very similar to Kyngstonn here as well, as Notre Dame didn't panic. This staff didn't panic when LSU and Ohio State, big dogs, were beating them for Christian Gray. They stayed consistent. And at the end of the day, Christian was like, this is more of who I am. And I think that's something that helped them here in the faith aspect, obviously helped a bit too, but they could have panicked. The previous staff would have panicked and moved on a long time ago, Brian, if they ever would have made the hard charge to begin with. Because they very rarely went out to Notre Dame. I think the last Bosco kid that Notre Dame tried to recruit was DJ Morgan. It's a nice player, 3-star kid, but he wasn't a difference maker. He wasn't an impact guy. Great kid and went to UConn and played a little bit at UConn there and all that. But these are just the battles they chose not to fight. And this staff said, no, we're going to fight because if we want to win a championship, these are the kind of kids we need to get. We can't, because the previous staff would have said, hey, we did great at linebacker last year, so we're okay this year's class. This staff said, no, we did great at linebacker last year, but we want to do great at linebacker again this year too. That's the competition thing, right?
Standard.
Exactly.
Because
I'm going to create competition, right? And the best way to get the most out of Drake Bowen is to make sure that he's always challenged to be his best. Because of what we got coming in. Same with Jaden Alsbury. Same with Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler. And that's how you build a great team with great depth and elite championship caliber play. And, they did that. They met their needs in every capacity now in this class. They took some chances, but they took chances on tall, long kids with verified 4.5 40 times.
Yes,
That's what they did.
exactly. Well, and Brian, I think that the greatest thing about to your point of kind of loading up and getting competition, is we live in a era of the transfer portal where guys leave so easily now, and there's going to be kids that leave Notre Dame. There is, ultimately every year there's going to be some. It's just going to happen because it's going to happen at every single program. Notre Dame is, this is my opinion, and I think that most schools should do this in this vantage point of some kids are going to leave at times. So let's get as many great football players as we possibly can, because if there are some defections, it's okay because we still got that guy coming up, this pipeline coming up. That's what Georgia does. I mean, this offseason, they lost Bear Alexander, who was an incredible player for them in the national championship game. It's like, okay, we have Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse and all these guys coming back. Like, we'll be fine, right? Because we have recruited to the highest level. That's what Notre Dame needs to keep doing.
Brian, let's watch a little film of Kyngstonn. So we've talked a lot about how all this went down. Let's get into the film of why and show why this is a big commitment. Now, an interesting aspect of this recruitment, Ryan, is this is a young man that missed his sophomore year.
Yes, he did.
I'm excited to see him this senior year, because when you have lower body injuries, it's almost always the case that you're always a little quicker, a little more explosive, a little more fluid the second year away from that injury. That's what his senior year is going to be. So he missed, I believe, his entire sophomore year, correct, Ryan? Because he got injured in the offseason, right? So missed his entire offseason. And you guys are going to see a really good football player here. So let's dive into this, Ryan. The first thing you're going to see, I do like the size. You and I were kind of talking about comps and stuff. And the thing that I said is he's a faster version, a slightly leaner and faster version of Junior Tuihalamaka. Is kind of how I see him. Good height, 6'2", probably looks listed as 6'3". Maybe he is. Looks a little more 6'2"-ish to me. Doesn't
6'2",
matter.
6'2 and a half, somewhere in the ballpark.
Good length. You see a sturdy frame, but he's not a really like a thick kid. Like some of these kids like him, you look at him and you're saying, hey, this kid's going to end up outgrowing the position. I don't see that kind of frame with him, but this is what I love. Look at the feet here, Ryan. Look how smooth. Bam. Look at that hip turn and then just jumps that route. This isn't a kid who's a box thumper, right? This is a kid to me, Ryan, and I wrote this in my breakdown. What makes him special to me is this is a kid that has truly 3-down ability as a run stopper, as a cover guy, and then also as a blitzer. He's impactful in all those areas. So this is a kid you don't have to take off the film. That was a great read. But the read was great, Brian, but look at that footwork. He's real efficient. He's clean. He makes a great read of the quarterback's eyes. Boom, boom, boom. Quick open and turn, and then downhill touchdown.
Well, I think the thing that you hit on that I was going to bring up as well is efficiency. And that's what I see with Kyngstonn. Like, there's no false steps. There is very easy footwork. He's just an easy mover, man. Like, he's not the, when we're talking about just straight line speed, he's not going to win the race of all the Notre Dame linebackers.
He's not outrunning Drake Bone and Jaden Osbury in a sprint. He's not outrunning Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak in a sprint. Right.
Yep. But he's loose. He's a very loose athlete who changes directions well because he has really efficient footwork. And I think he has a really good understanding of the position. And I think that he honestly sees the game as well as some linebackers that are on Notre Dame right now. I really think that he is this type of proactive mover in space. Like that first play that you showed with him jumping that slant, that is a play where he just saw that, like he just saw it. He just knew it was coming. There was proactiveness to it, not reactiveness. And I think that he is one of those kids that just gets the game. He just understands.
And that's not just a play, Ryan, that you're just so wicked smart and instinctive that you just jump that. That also comes from preparation going into the game.
Yeah.
You studied the film. You read the quarterback's drop. You saw his eyes lock in and you got under and you knew what was coming your way. I think that's a really good point. And some things I like about him, I think he's got a lot of potential as a run defender. I think his block destruction is really good, Ryan, but I would like to see him be a little bit more forceful with that initial engage sometimes. And you see that especially on the game film. You'll see him kind of take a block on, but like let it get to him. Then he's great at disengagement, right? Getting off to the ball. When he learns to be a little bit more, strike a little bit more on that initial contact, he's going to be even harder to block because I wouldn't say he has great length, but he's not short. He doesn't have short arms either. Like he'll be able to be a good block destructor when that initial pop gets better. This is against Modern Day. That's him beating Brandon Baker, I believe, right? Ryan, isn't that Brandon Baker, 72?
No, 73. Baker. He's the right tackle.
Baker 73?
Baker.
Okay.
Yeah. But still, either way, that's an
Yeah.
incredible play, shooting a gap and being able to, again, I think he's very loose. I mean, you even see them
Mhm.
use him as an edge rusher at times where I'm like, he's got a little looseness in his hips, man. Like he kind of run
Yep.
the outside track a little bit. Like
Yep.
I really, really flexible athlete for me.
He's got a little bit of Jordan Patel when he comes off the edge, Ryan. Not quite
Yeah.
as explosive as Jordan was, but that ability to kind of like bend and get underneath the arms and pads of the offensive tackle. You see that a few times. I'll be honest, he's one of those, one of the things I like about him, Ryan?
Yep.
He's one of those kids who I actually like his game film better than his highlights. I feel he's one of those kids that you don't really appreciate on highlights as much as you do on game film, because on game film, you just see how constantly active and locked in he is.
Yeah.
Even on plays where the ball's not coming to him, where it's just like, man, that was a really good run fit right there. Like there was nowhere to cut back. He didn't make the tackle. This is one of those ones I'm talking about. This is Brandon Baker right here. I believe.
Yes. The right.
Nope, that's not him either.
Nope,
It's 77.
Yeah.
So look like there. Modern day. I don't know if that's modern day or not.
Interesting.
But
well,
yeah, this is
Go ahead, I love the versatility. You see him, obviously, again, you just saw him playing overhang. You've seen him inside, obviously, as a true inside linebacker. You've seen him rush off the edge. They utilize him a lot. And I think that one thing that you can't undersell about this young man is that he's full of dudes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
He's going to USC. Did I just break up there? I think I made
a little bit right. You look like your mic
sorry.
just went out for a second, but it sounds like you're back.
Gotcha.
You're good.
So Marcellus Williams is going to USC. He has two other linebackers that are going to Texas A&M and Washington. He's got a safety behind him.
The kid going to Washington's also really good.
Athletic as anything, man.
He's really good. Yeah.
And then they got Peyton Woodyard behind him, who's going to the University of Georgia. He plays on a defense full of dudes, and he's the best player on the defense.
100% agree.
That's where we are. I mean, he was the best player on their defense last year. He's the leader. He's the vocal leader. He's the guy. He's the heart and soul of that defense that has NFL, probably NFL players, but college football players everywhere.
Big time college football talents all over the board. Yes, correct. And I like how they use him too, because they do have that speed at some other places that allows them to kind of play him inside out. And that's important too, Ryan. Just so people know, we will have a mailbag after this. So if you want to get your questions in, go ahead and fire them in. We do have a few of them already, but if you got some questions you want us to talk about with him or recruiting or whatever, go ahead and throw those in there as well. Yeah. Here's the other thing too, Ryan, is this is a trait that I don't see a lot of from linebackers this young, because what we'll see on film is we'll see kids that snap, they're just flying downhill. And that's great for highlight tape, but that's not really how linebacker gets played at the college level. You can't just fly downhill all the time, because that means you're basically run stunting all the time. There has to be some level of, you got to read and react. His combination of patience, read, and then burst is really impressive and advanced for his age, which is surprising when you consider he missed his entire sophomore season. That's something that surprised me when you watch how just savvy he is, that you're like, wow, this is a kid that you'd think he'd be a little bit more rusty than he was. I know. And he's just a really instinctive kid.
If he takes a step up from athleticism somehow with the second year off of the ACL tear, then we're talking about a potential 5-star if he does. Because I'm just evaluating what he is on this film right now athletically. But if there is a step that he takes, then this might even be a bigger get than we even realize now, because it's just
that's the thing that keeps him from being a 5-star in our view, right, Ryan? It's just he's a good athlete, but he's not an elite athlete. And that's what makes him not be a 5-star upside guy in my view, and why he's not a top 50 guy for me now, although he's close. He's very close. It's not that much of a step either, and so it's going to be impressive to see how it all plays out. Look at the hands there, right? He's got really quick hands. You can kind of see the link there a little bit. You love the motors. Feet never, that's nothing, right? His feet never stop moving.
Accelerate anything on contact.
Yep. He's just got that natural feel of when this is a great example. When contact comes, I've got to really drive.
Yeah, that's not fun. That's not fun if you're an offensive tackle. No, that's not fun.
No, it's not. That's not. No, I feel bad for that kid. But that's that lower body strength, getting the pads underneath him, and he doesn't even really like coil that much on that one. He just got that natural power. Oh,
he's got that Samoan strength, man. He's got the Samoan strength.
I don't know what the I don't know if somebody said something to him before this game, but this is like the third just destroy somebody that he's had against this team on film, dude. Goodness gracious.
Playing offenses too, man.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody said
Looks like
something
he's
about him
blocking
that
him
he
up.
didn't like. Look at that.
Yeah.
That's that patience we're talking about, right? Like stay on your assignment. Don't get sucked in with the running back. That's not your job. Stay on the quarterback. Eat it
Yep.
up. I believe that was against Mater Day as well. I believe, right? Isn't that the playoff game against Mater Day?
It
I
looks
think
like
it
it. Yeah.
was. Yeah.
Looks like it.
So this is this I would argue, I think you can make a case, Ryan, that if you're going to put him in a position, you project him as a Mike, that he's the best Mike in the country in the 2024 class, in my opinion. He's in that conversation, in my opinion. Yeah, I like this play too.
Certainly is. Certainly is.
Yep.
I mean, because he
Scoop.
has Oh, and that was number 6. That was House that forced that fumble as well, which is kid's going to Washington. So.
He's really good.
Yes, he's very, very athletic, man. They just use him everywhere, which is absolutely insane. I mean, again, I don't want to harp on it because I already made the point, but the fact that he is the best player on a team that is just loaded with high Division I talent, like that matters to me, man. Like that does matter. When Marcellus Williams and Peyton Woodyard and those types of caliber of players are looking at this kid to be the playmaker of the defense pretty consistently, like that says a lot to me.
Yep. We're going to watch the rest of these highlights play out, Ryan. Then we'll kind of talk a little bit about what's next before we dive into the mailbag. So you guys see what we're talking about here with Kyngstonn. I mean, the film doesn't lie. And I'm telling you, if you really want to enjoy watching him on film, there's some games of his online. Go find them.
Yeah.
Because he really is one of those kids that, and Jalen Smith was this way. Now, he's a much different type of player than Jalen Smith. So don't think that I'm comparing him to Jalen Smith stylistically, but you really couldn't really truly appreciate Jalen Smith. And Drew Tranquil was this way in high school too, Ryan. Drew's highlight tape was good, but you had to really watch Drew play a whole game to realize just how impactful he was in a game. And he did it as kind of a safety. Jalen was as a running back and as a linebacker. But you like those guys. Like, you really don't appreciate how good this guy is until you put in a game film and just see how from snap after snap, from getting guys lined up and moving them around and playing. He plays so many head games with quarterbacks, like coming up and dropping back and coming from depth and all those type of things. Like, it's all part of that instinctual aspect of it that makes him a really impactful player. And his freshman highlights are also pretty impressive if you want to have some fun with those. So when he was a little bit smaller, but looks a lot very similar to what he does now. So big pickup for Notre Dame, very impactful talent, and a kid that brings, I would argue, one of arguably the highest floor of all there are other linebackers they've signed with higher ceilings in recent seasons. Yeah. I don't know that there's a linebacker they've signed with a higher floor in the last couple seasons. Fair. Would you agree with that? Fair.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because he's just so technically advanced for his age, right? Like, he just gets the game, and he comes from a great program that's used to winning. He brings all the requisites, physical traits that you'd want, being 6'2 plus, 230 pounds as a junior in high school. So, yeah, I think that he brings an incredible baseline when you put everything together.
So, Ryan, let's talk a little bit about what's next at linebacker. Right. Because obviously we've had a lot of questions in the chat about, okay, do they go for another linebacker in the class? As of right now, I do not expect Notre Dame to go after another linebacker in this class. What we had said before is if Bradley Shaw would have wanted to come, they might have I think they would have taken him and then still kept on Kyngstonn. But once Kyngstonn committed before anybody else, they were going to shut it down. The only thing that would change that, Ryan, is if for some reason there was something changes on the current roster or current class for some reason. There's a major injury, there's a departure that right now we can't anticipate. But but even then, I still think they would just add another kid to the 24 class, and then maybe go to the portal for depth if they needed depth for next year. So I anticipate Notre Dame being done at linebacker. Again, never say never. But as of right now, I think that they're done. Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak seem pretty locked in right now to Notre Dame. So I believe they're done at linebacker in 24. So when we talk about what's next, Ryan, what this means now in June of 2023, Notre Dame can now start focusing its attention on the 2025 linebacker class, which is great news because for all the issues you and I have complained quite a bit about how the 24 class has got some really rough spots, There's some positions that are just not good. And it's a good year nationally, but not a great year nationally. And then some of the higher ranked kids, I believe, are just a tad overrated. When you look at the 25 board nationally, and then from a Notre Dame standpoint, the board is loaded. I believe Notre Dame's already over 20 offers at linebacker for linebacker rovers in this class.
Easy. Yeah.
And when you look at, there's also a lot of kids that fit the Notre Dame mold. So, for example, Notre Dame's twisted path to this linebacker class took some bad turns because there was kids that I believe you and I both believe that Notre Dame would have had a great chance to get Tylen Singleton, for example, if he could get into school.
Yes.
Love Notre Dame, but just it wasn't going to fit. It wasn't going to work from that regard. Next year's class is great fits and incredible talent. I could list right now off the top, like not off the top of my head because I'm looking at the list. That's not what I meant. But I'm just like right now I could go through and list 9 or 10 dudes easily that if Notre Dame landed, you're talking about that's a big pickup.
Yeah.
And most of these kids have already been on campus when you go through it. I mean, here's some of the guys that I absolutely love in next year's class. Justin Hill from Cincinnati, Christian Jones from Nebraska, Landon McComber from Las Vegas, Noah McHale from California, who's a dude. I really like Gavin Nix already in next year's class. Anthony Saka is an absolute stud in next year's class. Obviously, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. Carlton Smith's a very talented player in next year's class. Brett Clatterball is a really talented player in next year's class. And those are just the guys. Elijah Barnes, I know, is a guy that you like a lot. I believe, yeah. And I haven't even watched all these kids. There's still other kids that I haven't even watched yet. I haven't watched Bo Jackson yet. I haven't watched Marco Jones yet. I haven't watched Marquise Davis yet. I haven't watched, a couple of these kids yet that for next year's film, and I'm already loving this class. And there's some kids that are at safeties right now that I think could maybe project as rovers. When you talk about the other kid from Las Vegas, Matai Tagoa, he's a kid that I think when it's all said, he's already a 6 foot, 490-pound thumper as a safety. I think he's a rover when it's all said and done. Now you get a really big head start on that class. You've already had a bunch of these kids on campus already.
Yep.
You've like Noah McHale's been on campus already. A lot of, some of them haven't, but a lot of these kids have been on campus already. I believe Landon McComer's been on campus already. Obviously, I believe Josiah Key has been on campus because his brother played here. Justin Hill's been on campus already. Brett Clatterball's been on campus already. Anthony Saka's been on campus already. Carlton Smith has been on campus already. So now you want to get Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng on campus. You need to get him on campus. I don't believe Christian Jones has been on campus yet, Ryan. Has he?
Not yet.
Okay.
Nope.
But he's got a teammate that's committed to Notre Dame.
Yep.
So there are kids that you're going after already in 2025, and a bunch of them have already been on campus. And so now and here's the other part of it too, Ryan, because you got Kyngstonn, you can now be really picky about which linebackers you go after next year. And it's pretty much like you better be targeting dudes in next year's class. There's no need to rush and panic and take a projectable kid because you missed on the cup. No, get the dudes. And that's where the focus needs to be. And it's because you were able to get the 3-man class you got in back-to-back years that allows you to now say, we're looking at one of the better linebacker classes we've seen in recent years from a national standpoint. And you now have a full year head start on these guys, really. And you can be a little picky with them. There's no excuse now not to have another great linebacker class. And I think that getting Kyngstonn gives me faith that even though Marcus Freeman, because this was the first class, and this was our concern for a while, Ryan, this is the first class of linebackers that Notre Dame was going to get that weren't influenced by Marcus Freeman as the defensive coordinator. Because remember, when Drake Bowen committed to Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman was still the defensive coordinator. Brian Kelly was the head football coach. When Jaden Osbury fell in love with Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman was still the defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. This in Preston Zinter basically was a guy that Marcus Freeman went on the road and met and was like, we're getting that guy. Right.
Yeah.
So this is the first class you look at and say, this is all post Marcus Freeman as the linebacker coach DC. Can they still recruit linebacker at a high level? There's still some questions to be answered, but there's a lot more confidence now that he can continue that and the staff can continue that moving forward in 2025 when it's really going to be important because of how it is just how loaded it is. And there's a couple guys in there, Ryan, too, that are projectable kids. I could see Justin Hill outgrowing linebacker and becoming a Viper.
Oh, easy.
I could even
Yeah.
see Noah McHale a little bit kind of following the Jordan Patelho route down the road if he keeps growing, and some of those guys like that.
Yep.
So love next year's linebacker class. And now that's where the Notre Dame focus is on, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you made a good point about like Matai Tagovailoa, who is the star safety out of Nevada. Like there's a couple kids on that safety board that are 6'3", 6'4", and 190 pounds already. So if we're talking about the Rover conversation, like those guys have to be at least a mention in that. But yes, I mean, they're in a good early spot. It's pretty absurd to think about, but I mean, if you ask me right now, like of the 2025 linebackers, who's Notre Dame in a good spot with? I mean, it's several. I mean, it really
Yeah.
is. I mean, they are in a good spot currently with Noah McHale, and they're in a good spot. And again, this is not commit tomorrow good spot, but
Right.
it's
Still
in
a
a
lot of
good
work to be done.
early
Right.
spots. Sure. Landon McComber, they're in a very good spot with Christian Jones. Although he hasn't been to campus yet, they're in a very good spot with a guy like Christian Jones. Anthony Saka has been to campus already, and they're in a good spot with him. I mean, and they are, although Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng is probably going to be a tough pull again out of IMG now, transferring down from the state of Maryland. He listed Notre Dame as one of his top 4 schools, and he's never been to Notre Dame before. So, yeah, I
That
think that
article you had on him was very encouraging because we hadn't
yeah,
really heard a lot about him and his interest level in Notre Dame. So that was very
yeah.
important.
Yeah. No, I think it was great that Notre Dame was the only school listed that was outside of the state of Florida. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting, right? Like very, very interesting. So I think when you look where you are with some of these linebackers, you're very confident with potentially how you're going to move forward with the 2025 class. And they bring a lot of position flexibility, to your point. I mean, there's a lot of guys that can fit into multiple linebacker spots or eventually transition to a completely different position, play some Viper. And there are a lot of those guys on the board.
Anthony Saka and Notre Dame have a really good early bond. That's another one. And I've heard, right, we're still trying to get confirmation from him, but I've been told by some people from down there that Gavin Nix likes Notre Dame a lot too.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some kids that have my interest in Notre Dame. And I think a recruitment like this helps because the best players don't look at getting Kyngstonn like, oh man, I want to go there now. I don't want to compete. No, they're like, oh, Notre Dame's doing something, right? I mean, that's usually how those, at least that's the kind of kids that you want anyway. So that's the what's next, Ryan. So that's going to wrap up sort of the coverage of the commitment. We're going to move on to the mailbag next, but obviously, Ryan, big pickup for Notre Dame, getting Kyngstonn and being able to put this kind of bow on top of the defensive class. I think completely changes the view and the outpick. And it's hard for one guy to do that. But when you look at what their needs were, I mean, this is big. You've now landed impact caliber ends, an impact linebacker with some high ceiling guys, an impact corner, an impact safety. I feel a lot better about the defensive class today than I did 24 hours ago. A
100%.
lot better because of their ability to get Kyngstonn. And then also what that says about Notre Dame, not just getting him, but what it says about Notre Dame. I think is very important.
Agree. I mean, there were a few of the top targets that we talked about, and Justin Scott was obviously in that conversation before he committed to Ohio State, where you're like, Notre Dame needs those guys. You need to be able to land those. And there was some hardships there, right? That there were a lot of downs in those instances. Justin obviously being a perfect example of that. But this was a much needed boost of, oh, okay, Notre Dame's here to play with the big boys. Like they can do it. So yes, you got a great talent, you got a great young man, you got a great leader, and you were able to beat one of your Midwest rivals to be able to do it, which is the biggest thing.
And we didn't really mention this. We talked about the defensive class. Now you're a Gearby Lambert pickup away from really finishing off with some momentum, because momentum is a thing, right? Especially with fans. And that's another one you'll have to beat Ohio State for to get Gearby Lambert. That's another one we're going to be Ohio State for. Doesn't matter quite as much because Notre Dame has beat them for some big-time offensive linemen in the past, but it matters from this standpoint because the guy that beat Ohio State for those big-time linemen in the past was Harry Hiestand, not Joe Rudolph. And so it would also be a really good sign that you're able to beat Ohio State for a kid that they wanted, that's a big-time, one of the best offensive tackles in the class, and you did it with Joe Rudolph, not Harry Hiestand.
Yeah.
And I think that's so if they can, pardon me, pull that off, that now all of a sudden that momentum starts getting back to where Notre Dame goes into fall camp with recruit. You're feeling really good about where recruiting is going. for the team now moving forward. So just certainly a big pickup. Hey, we're going to go to the mailbag next, folks. Before we do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Ryan put a really long sort of timeline on there. I'm going to add a little bit of an intel piece, some of it that I'm going to put in there. Ryan already has in his piece. That's on the message board only type of thing. I'm going to have just a little kind of a backstory of how this all went down on the message board as well. You can definitely check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Can be an annual member, a monthly member. We had a Gold Club sign up today. We've had a Shamrock Club sign up today for the Booster Club. You can join those as well. So definitely check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. It's got a lot of people are fired up today, Ryan. A lot of super chats today and some questions. If y'all want to get some questions in the mailbag, throw those in there now. Jonathan Burns with a super sticker. Jonathan, thank you very, very much. Q Woodard with a super chat. Thank you. Said knew it would be a good show today. Yes, it does. Also had a super sticker from John Bertucci. So thank you very much for that, John. Appreciate you very, 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 very much. Let's go to some more here, Ryan. We got one from Chris Irish Young. My wife will be mad at me for being on my phone. Oh, well, let's go.
That's awesome.
So thank you very much for that one as well. So we'll get to these, Ryan. Let's start off right here. Have you read these here as we move forward?
We had a super chat from Frank G. Thank you so much, Frank. He said, Brian, I just wanted to thank you for your comments on the board. These young men and women earned this right to announce their commitment without any spoilers. Love the constant integrity of the IB family for these athletes.
And then he had another one that's kind of along the same lines. Frank, we really appreciate both of those. I want to give you all some backstory on what Frank's talking about. This is something I put on the board today. So Ryan and I had a talk today, and I've recently kind of had some issues with the way that we have done live shows in the past, because one thing I can't stand is this constant notion of taking the moment away from kids. You guys have heard me rail against this before. I don't like how people in our business just feel this need to be right or to be first or to, people going on, hey, we're here and it's going to be Notre Dame for Kyngstonn today. Why? We're 3 hours away. Why can't you just wait till 5, let him have his moment, then give your backstory and we'll all know that you were connected. But then I also kind of felt a little conviction of, well, we would only do commit live shows if the kid was picking Notre Dame. And it was clear. I mean, you knew if we said we're doing a live show, you knew what was going to happen. Now, we never said it, and that was my justification, Ryan, was, well, we don't say he's picking Notre Dame, but everybody knew. And so it was a backhanded way of kind of stealing that spotlight. And so our new decision is going to be, until we're ready with CFB Nation and Irish Breakdown, until we're in a position to kind of cover all commitments, then we're not going to cover any live where we play the video and we carry it live and then break it down, because we also didn't like the fact that we're sitting there saying, well, if this kid picks Notre Dame, we're kind of doing the pregame stuff when we know he's picking Notre Dame. And so what we decided to do is we're going to follow what we believe is the right way to do it, which is to not do things that take away the kid's moment. If the kid tells us it's okay for us to do that, then we'll do it. And that's, but that's his choice, and we're going to respect that. So we will not be doing live shows where we carry a kid's commitment anymore until we get to the point where we're doing it for all recruits, whether they're going to pick Notre Dame or not, or even looking at Notre Dame. And we're just not there yet. And that'll be more of a CFB Nation thing down the road. So we'll get there, but that's not where we are right now. And hopefully we'll have some kids make their decisions on our show. But so that's why we did not go live today. Ryan, you and I found out, I was actually sitting in the parking lot at church when you first texted me this morning, getting ready to go into church, that we kind of got the word that this was going to happen. And we decided not to go live to air it because we knew what that would meant. Even if we went live and we tried to tell people we really don't know, that would have A, been a lie, and then B, people would have said, hey, no, that's Notre Dame. IB never goes live unless the kid's going to commit. And, because we were originally going to go right before live, and I just didn't feel comfortable with it. And so we're going to not be hypocritical on this and put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and not go live until a kid has made a decision. And we'll do what we did today, Ryan. As soon as he commits, we'll publish the show and say, hey, we're going live in 10 minutes. And that's what we'll do. And then we can all come celebrate together. So Frank, I appreciate you both for those super chats and for your support. And I'll be honest, I was a little surprised at how many people supported that decision on the board. And I hope the people in the show support that decision as well.
Agree. We had another super chat from Andrew Gilmore. Andrew, thank you so much. He said, huge win. Happy for Al Washington. Does Notre Dame still pursue Bradley Shaw? So, I mean, we hit on that a little bit, Andrew.
And we had, there's some others like Ant VR also asked that. And so let's just be, Ryan, just be real clear about how we see this one.
Yeah, as of right now, we do not anticipate Notre Dame targeting anybody else in the linebacker class in 2024. I think the attention is going to turn now to 2025 and being super particular with that class. Could things change if there's something with the roster that is going to be foregone after the season, or there's a defection that you're not anticipating right now that happens? It's always possible. But as of right now, we do not anticipate there being a push for Bradley or anybody else on the 2024 linebacker board, or a linebacker that isn't on the board right now. We think that they stay pat with 3 as of today.
And Ryan, regarding Al Washington, this needs to be emphasized again because, yes, defensive tackle recruiting has to get better. We've talked about this. Defensive tackle recruiting has been an issue at Notre Dame for way before Al Washington was Notre Dame's defensive line coach. It's been an issue for a while. And they've gotten some guys here and there that were good players, but overall it's been a mess. But this defensive end class, which has been primarily driven by Al Washington, is very good. Yeah. And he did play a very important role in this. Now, is he the primary reason? Nobody is other than Marcus Freeman. But it would have been a lot harder for Marcus Freeman to close on this kid if not for the impact that Al Washington has had really over the last year in this recruitment. So, yes, he deserves praise for that. He deserves praise for the defensive end haul that he brought in this class in Cole Mullins, Logan Thomas, and Bryce Young. And now it's like, okay, now let's go take that next step and really start doing the thing you need to do at defensive tackle. They do have a commitment from Davion Dixon, who's a top 200 caliber player next year's class, who's a good football player. Jarquez Carter, who I think is a very talented athletic 3 technique, would be a really nice compliment to Davion Dixon, is going to be visiting here in late July. So certainly taking steps in the right direction, in my opinion, is Al Washington as a recruiter. Now it's time to take that next step and, not have the misses like the Justin Scotts or whatever, but we can't hammer him for missing on Justin Scott and ignore the big impact he had on the defensive end class and the commitment of Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa either, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I mean, Al, it was funny. I remember when Kyngstonn came on the show before, on the podcast, obviously, and I asked him about coaches, and I believe Al Washington was the first guy he mentioned at that point, which is just, again, it speaks volumes, because for everything that we push back against Al Washington, just saying in the universe, right, as far as the misses that he's had, there's also been some very good with Al Washington that we need to recognize. And this is one of them. Al Washington gets a big assist for Kyngstonn. He helped bring them from behind with the relationship that he had. There's no doubt about that.
Put it in position where Coach Freeman could close on it. Right. If you look at my board, Ryan, the Irish Breakdown board of rankings, my number 1, 2, 3, and 4 prospects in this class are Kyngstonn 1, Cole Mullins 2, I'm talking like in the 680s, 1 point difference. That gives you an inclination. So Kyngstonn 1, Cole Mullins 2, it's Bronte Johnson 3, and Logan Thomas 4. 3 of those 4, Al Washington played a key role in getting them in the class.
Yep.
So we've always said this. It's not personal. When you do a good job, we're going to praise you. When you don't do a good job, you're going to be criticized. That's how we're going to be. And with the Justin Scott is one we're very hard on Coach Washington, but some of these other wins were big. Yeah. And I just want to emphasize too the team nature of how they got this one done. Yeah. Yes, Coach Freeman you don't do it without him, but you don't do it without Coach Washington and the role that Chad and his group of people played in it, and the role Max Bulla did kind of late, getting really in late and sharing his vision of how he would coach them up. And Coach Golden had a role in this as well. You can't deny that either. Was Al Golden a driver of this recruitment? No. Did he have an impact on it to a degree? Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's all of it went together to make this a win, and it's a big win for Notre Dame.
We had another super chat from Andrew Gilmore. Andrew, thank you so much. He says, what is Lincoln Riley thinking in terms of Alex Grinch? Didn't Kyngstonn visit USC many, many times? You cannot use the portal to replace a guy like Kyngstonn.
I don't know. It's kind of interesting. He did visit many times.
Yes.
I don't know if this necessarily says anything about Alex Grinch. I think USC did a good job, but right now USC does not have the perception of being a program that is a place you want to be a great defensive player at. I mean, you know what I mean? I just don't know if they're there right now, and they don't play very good defense. And
They
for
don't.
all the complaining that Notre Dame fans do about the Notre Dame defense, I'm like, could you imagine if you all had to root for a team that played defense the way that USC did last year? I mean, they gave up 29.2 points per game. They gave up 28 to Stanford and gave up 25 to Arizona State, 43 to Utah, 37 to Arizona, 35 to Cal, 45 to UCLA, 27 to Notre Dame, 47 in a rematch with Utah, and then 46 to Tulane. I think that's where you could say, let's criticize Alex Grinch. But here's a reality check for some people. Lincoln Riley's always had defenses like this, no matter who his defensive coordinator was. At some point in time, you got to look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm part of the problem.
Right.
And you can keep going out there and getting these transfers and throwing money at them and promise them the LA glitz and glamour, but eventually you're going to have to be able to start getting some of these kids. But they're starting to. I mean, the Marcellus Williams kid was a really good pickup for them in the secondary. I mean, they're starting to improve their high school recruiting. So I don't know if I would overreact too much to this. I think Notre Dame just did a great job. And guys, let's be honest. Notre Dame going out to California and winning big-time recruitments is not a new thing, right? It's not. California's been a base state for Notre Dame for a very long time. They're just now starting to reignite some of the impact type of kids from the region. But this isn't a new thing for Notre Dame.
It is not.
All right, let's get to some. We got some more super chats before we get to some other questions as well.
Charlie Weiss is last spell. What's up, Charlie? She said, I just went scuba diving with sharks and came back to the wonderful news. Awesome pickup. Hats off to the crew who was involved with getting him. Wow, Charlie, scuba diving with sharks, man. That's intense.
I mean, I'm just glad that you got back. You know what I mean? Like that's.
I've done some snorkeling and scuba diving with turtles and dolphins and stuff, but sharks, that's a new one, man. That's intense. It's pretty intense. I respect it though, man. You're a braver man than I am, Charlie.
Yeah, that's not something you're going to see me doing, Ryan. I can promise you that.
I wouldn't be going with sharks either.
Nope.
No.
I don't watch Shark Week. I'm not a big ocean guy, period. It's like, no, I'm good, man. I'm just going to stay in my clear pool where I can see everything inside. I'm good.
We had a super chat from Wicked Bronco Productions. Thank you so much, Wicked. Justin Scott stings, but our fan base will sing a different tune if by National Signing Day we have Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa and Gerby Lambert, as well as CJ Carr and Cam Williams, who I feel are all 5-star caliber kids. KVA reminds me of Manti so much.
I mean, I get why people say he reminds them of Manti. I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I get
the background and stuff.
Right,
Yeah,
right. And body type and all that. I mean, I get that. I think that's quite. Yeah, there's some differences there. I think Kyngstonn Manti was a lot more powerful.
Yeah,
Kingstonn's a little bit more fluid,
smoother,
and athletic. They're different players, but I can understand why people would have that comparison. Right.
I get it. Yeah. But I agree with you that you will change your tune a little bit if you end the way. Because that was the thing with last year. It wasn't that Notre Dame didn't sign a really good class. It was the sting of who didn't sign with Notre Dame last year that everybody was so distasteful.
There's not as much of that this year if they can keep everybody in the class and get Gerby, right? It's like, 100%. You're always going to have that if only they would have got Justin Scott. But outside of that, the other misses are more you and I disagreeing with who they prioritized. Right. Like you and I might disagree that they should have taken Caleb Brewer over Anthony Knapp, right? But they made that choice. It wasn't that they lost him. Sure. We may say, hey, somebody could argue, well, I wish they would have gone with Malachi Williams over Logan Thomas. Okay. I mean, we can have that conversation. It's a fun debate to have, but this was the choice they made. They liked Logan Thomas more. They felt he fit what they were trying to do more. That's a decision they made. There weren't those stunning losses. And I would argue if they get Gerby, you could make a case that there's more upper level 5-star-ish caliber players in this class compared to last year's class. If they get Gerby, I would say you could make that case. That because last year the only guy we had as a 5-star was Jagasol. right now I have one kid for sure as a 5-star, CJ Carr, but there's several others that are not far away. Cam Williams is not far away. He's another good year jump away from being in a 5-star for me. Gilby Lambert's not that far away. I could see him if he has a jump like Charles Jagasaw had. I would argue he was further along than Charles Jagasaw was as a junior. Then Charles Jagasaw had a big jump as a senior. I had more certainty as a junior that Gilby Lambert can play tackle than I did Charles Jagasaw. So if Gilby makes a similar jump, he's a 5-star kid. To your point from earlier, Ryan, if Kyngstonn kind of has that year 2 away from the injury, get a little bit more of the burst back, then we're having a conversation about him being in there because he's not that far away from it. So I think you could make that case. It's a very high caliber class. I would say I like last year's depth a little better, Ryan, than this year's class.
Agreed.
But I think that the top of this year's class can absolutely compete, if not maybe slightly ahead of last year's class. I don't know that I would necessarily go that far, but it's certainly in the conversation to be, especially on defense. Because last year's class, some of the better outside of Christian Gray, Drake, and Jaden Alsbury, I would argue last year's class was about the really lower floor, really high ceiling guys.
Yeah.
Like Boubacar and Armel and Brennan Vernon and even Micah Bell to a degree. The other guys were like those real steady Ben Minnick types and Devin Houston types and the Don Schuler types that are good football players, but maybe not the ceilings of and even the floors of the Kingstons and guys like that and Cole Mullen. So yeah, there's a lot of fairness to that. Good comments.
Another one from Ricky Bracco Productions. Thank you. If we get Deuce Knight, who I think is the second best quarterback in the class behind Bryce Underwood, 2025 quarterback, I believe Knight is ranked 3rd. When is the last time Notre Dame got back-to-back-to-back quarterbacks of Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr, and Deuce Knight?
Well, I mean, not that long ago. I mean, Notre Dame went through a stretch, folks, where in consecutive recruiting classes, they got Everett Golson, Gunnar Keel, Malik Zaire, Deshaun Kaiser, and Brandon Wimbush. And Brandon Wimbush was a top 50 caliber recruit. Deshaun Kaiser was a top 100 recruit by at least one service. Gunnar Keel was a 5-star recruit. Everett Golson should have been a much higher ranked recruit. He wasn't just because of his size. And Malik Zaire was a top 100 caliber guy. So we've seen stretches like this before. What I would say is I'm a little more confident in the development of the quarterback position now than I was then, right? Because the argument we had for a long time was Notre Dame got talented kids. I mean, Deshaun Kaiser's is just God-given ability as good as anybody they've had. And the only other person that you can maybe argue is even better is Everett. Just pure arm talent. They just didn't develop those guys. Malik Zaire was no slouch. I mean, Malik Zaire had the strongest arm of all of them, including Brandon Wimbush. And then you have like a Phil Dracovic, who was a stud, right? It was never about, they can't get talented players. You and I always push back on they can't recruit talented quarterbacks. They've done it. The problem is development. Now, they had gone through a recent stretch where quarterback recruiting was bad, but that was partly by poor planning and poor choice by Brian Kelly. Tommy Reese liked Cade Klubnik and Drew Outler. Brian Kelly didn't want to go after him. That's really what it came down to. It was just laziness. But Notre Dame's always had the ability to recruit quarterbacks. The question is, can they develop them? Because if Notre Dame's as good as we think they're going to be this year, then you're going to say the 2 best years that Notre Dame had in the last 3 years were both with transfer quarterbacks. You got to prove that you can develop these kids. And that still remains a question. I'm a lot more confident because if Notre Dame would have had Deshaun Kaiser take the high school to end of his career jump that Desmond Ridder took at Cincinnati under Geno,
right?
He's a top 10 NFL draft pick, Ryan.
Yeah.
I mean, because his physical tools, I would argue, are better than Desmond Ridder's. Just God-given arm talent and athleticism and size.
Yeah.
They just didn't develop them up here and here. That's the problem.
Yep.
Right. So, yeah, the development's the thing for me. But yeah, if they could get Deuce Knight, that'd be huge. And he's on campus, Ryan, in 4 days, right? He's on campus Thursday.
Yep.
So it'll be Thursday, right? I believe he'll be on campus. So it'll be a big one.
We had another one from Wicked Bronco Productions. Thank you so much. The thing Andrew mentioned with Alex Grinch was because a USC insider from On3 said that USC's lack of getting elite defensive recruits has been because of how bad USC's defense has been, and kids want to see it improve.
Sure. We've kind of talked about that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we were talking
Why
about.
would you want to go waste away? Like, you
Right.
want
They
to be
don't
a
have
part of
that
a good unit.
reputation. Right. They don't have that reputation of being a great defensive team, and everybody can blame Alex Grinch all they want. But here's the consistent thing under Lincoln Riley. No matter who their defensive coordinator was, they've never been very good on defense. And at some point in time, you've got to say one of two things is true. Okay. This is what you have to admit if you're Lincoln Riley. Number one is you are very bad at hiring defensive coordinators. You do a bad job of picking and choosing defensive coordinators. Because outside of 2020, the COVID year, when they gave up only 21 points a game, that was aided by a shutout of Southwest Missouri State and a giving up only 9 points to Kansas. The rest of the games, they gave up 38, 37, 45, 14, 28, 13, 14, 21, and 20, right? Outside of that COVID year, and Ryan, what have you and I always said about the COVID year? When that's the anomaly over everything else you've done, then you have to kind of ignore it because it was the COVID aspect of it, right? Last 4 years, Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern have sucked all but 1 year. It was the COVID year, right? So maybe you're the problem because Alex Grinch hasn't been your D coordinator this entire time. You've had other D coordinators, and guess what? Your defenses continue to suck. You've only had 1 year out in your entire tenure as head coach where you give up fewer than 25 points a game, and that was the COVID year. Maybe you're part of the problem, right? At some point in time, it's not Alex Grinch's fault. It's on Lincoln Riley to address and fix.
Some of those Oklahoma teams had some really good defensive talent on it
Yeah.
too, and just wasn't utilized very well. Like I remember that Isaiah Thomas defensive line that they had a couple years ago. Like that was a talented defense and just wasn't very good.
Right. Even you're talking about the 2020. Nick Bonito got drafted. Isaiah Thomas, I believe, got drafted. Perrion Winfrey was an NFL type of kid. You had Jalen Redmond on that team. Patrick Fields, Brian Asamoah. Like you had some NFL talent on that football team, and you gave up over 25 points a game.
Yep.
Right. I mean, at what point in time do you start saying I can't keep cycling out defensive coordinators and blaming defensive coordinators that I might actually be part of the problem with how we run our team and how we practice and the type of offense that we run, and just say, hey, but that I can live with that. This is what I think Lincoln Riley looks. I don't need you to be a top 10 NFL or a top 10 defense. I just need you to make stops in moments where help us win football games. All I need you to do. But that's also why I think he's eventually going to never not be a champion until he changes that, because eventually you're going to get to a team that can match you, can go toe-to-toe with you scoring, but can stop you has a better chance of stopping you because their defense is better than you do. That's just the way that I see it. And, you can blame Alex Grinch all you want, but to me, this is a Lincoln Riley problem. So we get down another super chat down here from Shelton Hager. Shelton, thank you very much. Thank you for your super chat. He says, let's go. Thanks for being pure class IB. Y'all won't be outmatched. I appreciate that, Shelton. Shelton, very, 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 very much. Let's go back up here to Paulie B27. He goes, if you're doing a mailbag, does Notre Dame landing Kyngstonn maybe swing in their favor to flip Scott back over to the Irish, or perhaps draw an interest from other high-level defensive players? Go Irish. I don't think it'll have a huge impact on Justin Scott right now. I think Justin Scott made his decision, Ryan. I think what this really comes down to is you want to flip Justin Scott. This could be a thing that puts him over the edge if you're able to do other things to get him and then go out and beat Ohio State. Like, look, guys, I don't care if Justin Scott's right now thinking, man, I might want to rethink my Notre Dame decision because of this. Let's not forget, Notre Dame wasn't even number 2, right? Like if Justin Scott's rethinking his decision right now, it's, maybe I should have gone to Michigan or Miami. It's not Notre Dame, right? If Notre Dame if they're going to get Kyngstonn, it's going to be, Justin Scott, it's going to be because a lot of other things happen. They stay on and they continue to recruit them. They do all those things, but you got to go beat Ohio State. At the end of the day, that's what you got to do. Now, if you're able to do all of that, then having Kyngstonn might help you a little bit, sure. But if Kyngstonn, I want to remind people of this. Notre Dame was not a close runner-up for number 2 for Justin Scott. The kid would not even visit this summer, refused to visit Notre Dame this summer. It's going to take a whole lot more than landing Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa to do that. So, yeah. Yeah. And Ryan, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds
good.
Sorry.
All good.
We had a question from Jacob Hayden who said, mailbag, when a kid calls coaches on which decision he makes, is it a gentleman's agreement for the coaching staff to accept, or do they try and talk into their school one last time? I
It
mean,
it varies depending on
yes, it
school.
varies.
Most schools have the respect to say, you sure? You really think you could do some great things here? You sure? I
Yeah,
respect that. And then you let him have his moment, and then you just stay on him,
yeah,
right? But there will
they're
be some
different.
that,
Yeah,
I mean, I've heard stuff about coaches yelling at a kid. He calls them to tell him. I mean, I've heard stories about, especially down in the SEC. I've heard this a few times. They'll call and tell the school, "Hey, I'm going to so and so," and they'll start cussing at them, and just like, man, it's like you guys are losing your minds. Most
seriously, man.
schools will not do that. They'll have respect for the kid because they also know, like, if you do that, you have no shot at.
Ever. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's it. Yeah,
you know,
exactly. You're
yeah.
basically
Let
just
him have
burning
his
a bridge
moment,
at
and
that
then
point.
just stay on him. Just
Yeah.
keep that relationship going. Stay on him.
Timeout Tom. I heard Rico Flores name a great deal early in the spring, but he seemed to disappear as Great House emerged. Does Flores still fit Notre Dame's plans for this year?
That might have happened, like in Dom. Don't take my comment the wrong way. That might have happened in your perception because all that's talked about is the spring game. But I know of nowhere in Irish Breakdown has Rico Flores' name disappeared. They don't even play the same position. Rico's more of a Z, and Jaden
Yeah.
Greathouse is right now more of a slot guy
Yep.
for Notre Dame. So, uh, I mean, the only way I could say that is if you're just looking at it saying that because Greathouse was so good in the spring game and Rico didn't catch any balls, but like almost no one on the blue team caught any passes in that game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Tobias, I don't think had one catch. Dion didn't have a catch.
Yeah, they
Rico
didn't
didn't
do
have a
much.
catch. Chris Tyree didn't have a catch. Braylon James didn't have a catch because nobody had catches on the blue team. They only completed like 5 or 6 passes the whole game, if I remember correctly. It was crazy.
It was ugly, man. It was
But no,
ugly.
he is. Does he still fit in their plans? I mean, he just finished 1 semester of college. Of course, he still fits in their plans. Yes, absolutely. Also, a reason that you need to be on the message board, Tom. If you're not on the message board, you should be on it because I had a pretty big intel piece on Rico on that, Ryan. I don't know if you had a chance to read that or not
I
yet.
did.
Had a really big intel on Rico and the job he's doing this summer and what the staff thinks about him. If you are on the board and you just didn't see that, just find one of the intel articles and click on the green intel tag, and it'll pull up all the intel articles, and you go find. No, I think it's Notre Dame Summer Intel Offense Edition. I think it was part 1 is the one I had on the receivers, Ryan, I believe.
Yeah.
So you can find that on there, Tom, and check that out. But yeah, big part of Rico, and I know we've talked about him a lot in our previews of the receiver position for sure.
And it's only one spring, so yes,
Right,
he's
exactly.
still part of their plans
Exactly.
for a long time.
They like Rico a lot.
Joe Medina says, who's the biggest uncommitted name left on Notre Dame's board? Who's the biggest name, uncommitted or not, on Notre Dame's wish list other than Justin Scott? On the board, it's Gerby Lamberts as we stand today. Offensive tackle out of Massachusetts, 6'7", 285 pounds. He is the missing piece of this offensive line group in 2024, which I think will make it a good to very good class yet again for the second straight year. And I think Joe Rudolph has the potential to make a big impact, obviously, on that one. So, yes, he is the biggest one as of right now.
Yeah, it's Gearby, and that's really it. I mean, I could see them getting Gearby and then just being like trying to flip a couple kids, and that's about it. I mean, they're done at running back, done at quarterback. They may still try to stay involved in Carter Nelson until they get a second tight end in 25. There's no offensive lineman. I mean, literally, they're going to land their top 2 offensive linemen if they get Gearby that they wanted. Justin Scott at D tackle, no linebackers. Caleb Beasley at corner, no safeties. I mean, I think they're
unless you count Davis Andrews as a 2024.
Yeah, but I mean, he'll have made his decision wherever he's going.
Yeah,
by the time the season kicks off. Correct. But yeah, I kind of, for me, Ryan, I kind of count him as a 26 guy. Like,
it's fair.
Just doesn't make it any less important to get him because I think he's really good. But yeah.
We had Greg O said, as far as linebacker depth goes, is Keanu Kia coming back for his Mormon mission next year? What impact would that have?
Ryan, you want to take that one? Because I know you've spoken to the family about this one somewhat recently, right?
Yep, of course. Yeah. So Josiah Kia is his younger brother in the 2025 class that Notre Dame is recruiting as well. He's kind of a rover body type, 6'2", 200 pounds, right now. Keanu, as far as I know, as far as the last conversation I had, he is doing his mission right now, I believe in the state of North Carolina or Virginia. It was one of those.
Area of North Carolina.
Yeah, I think it was North Carolina. So the plan is 2024 season he will be back for, so be prior to next season. And as far as we know right now, he will be welcome back and we'll see obviously what his body looks like and how he figures into the conversation at that point.
Now, I believe, Ryan, that Notre Dame actually played him in 2021, his freshman season, because my guess would be that the plan was play him then, don't waste a year. And by what I mean by that is if you say, well, you wasted a year by playing him. No, because now you can redshirt him when he gets back and you have a year to get him back into shape.
Build his body back up.
And then because then you're when you're doing that year to build his body back up and get him into shape, now you are wasting a year because you've already used his red shirt. And so you're now basically sitting him on the bench for nothing. Where he played, I think, 8 or 9 games as a freshman. So that was actually smart to play him on special teams and as a backup linebacker in some blowouts, knowing that you're going to want to redshirt him in the year he gets back from his mission. So I think that was actually a really smart strategy by Notre Dame to do that with him, in my opinion. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ryan, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Play him now, and because then he would have been 3 years out having really played in a football game. Because his freshman year at Notre Dame, and then maybe 4 years because you don't know how much he's going to play in 24 when he's coming back off of a 2-year mission. So I think I like the strategy. I think it made a lot of sense. I'm going to ask this one, Ryan, to see because let you answer this one. Stephen Goods said, "Who is the NFL comparison to Viliamu-Asa?" I'm looking at a bigger Bob Sanders.
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't compare him to Bob Sanders. That was a safety, but I mean, it's tough, man. I actually don't have a great comparison for Kyngstonn at the moment. Like his body type.
What about the Broncos, the kid from Iowa that the Broncos have?
Josie Jewell.
Josie Jewell. Thoughts on that? Or is he a little better in coverage than Josie was?
Yeah, I think he's a little smoother than Josie. Josie was a little more of a downhill type of kid. I don't know. I would say, Steven, because I think you're on the message board, I believe, if I remember correctly, but maybe ask this one for me if you want my opinion just directly, maybe in like a day or so, because like I just haven't penciled in a good comp yet for Kyngstonn, because he is kind of a interesting linebacker. Like he doesn't really, because he's a downhill kid, but he's not like the traditional downhill kid because he's got more length and a little bit more smoothness than you would kind of pigeonhole into that role. So I think that there's a better comp than what I currently have out there right now.
All right, here we go. Ryan from Florida Irishman.
Florida Irishman says, mailbag, do you think he will now be a good recruiter for Notre Dame? I think it's just his presence is a really good recruit. Like he is a St. John Bosco kid. He's a highly rated kid, and he's a really like well-spoken kid. He's not incredibly outwardly and like rah-rah, like that's not his style, but I think Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa is going to be a guy that you're like, oh, that guy's going to play for you? That's pretty dope.
He will do for kids what others did for him. He's going to give you an honest opinion of why he made the choice that he did, and then say, you got to go do what you got to do. But yes, in that regard, I think that matters. I think that'll absolutely have an impact. No doubt about it.
Yep. We had Andy Football Nerd who said, now that Notre Dame has a 3 top-tier linebacker class in 3 consecutive classes from 2024 to 2026. Can the linebacker room be the defense what the offensive line tight end rooms are for the offense?
Hope so.
It's about development at that point, right?
Yeah,
like,
hope so.
Talent is certainly going to be there, but are they going to be developed as well as the offensive line and the tight ends? Like that's where it comes.
Because that's like Notre Dame's not known for being great recruiters of offensive linemen, right? A lot of the big time players Notre Dame had, Ronnie Stanley wasn't a highly ranked guy, Nick Martin wasn't a highly ranked guy, you know what I mean? A lot of the guys they had weren't highly ranked guys. It was the development piece. Michael Mayer was a highly ranked player. Durham Smythe wasn't. Tommy Trumbull wasn't. You know, so Cole Kmet and Brock Wright were, but the others weren't. So last 2, Ryan. But I do think that, to your point, though, it's one thing to recruit it. Now you got to develop it. That's going to be the key. Because otherwise you're just receivers where they recruited a bunch of good players every year but could never develop them. You recruited a bunch of good quarterbacks every year, but you never developed them. It's about the development piece. And then that makes the recruiting even better.
Yep. We had Andrew Gilmore who said, who is the better recruiter, Marcus Freeman or Mario Cristobal?
I think Marcus Freeman is, because Marcus Freeman's doing as good of a job, if not better, than Mario Cristobal. I would argue better, and he doesn't have the, let's just say, resources to land a high school recruits the way that Miami does. So absolutely Marcus Freeman. If I had to pick one of the 2, absolutely Marcus Freeman. 100%.
In a vacuum. I mean,
and I think the results are even better too the last 2 years.
I can't imagine Marcus Freeman with, some improper benefits behind him. Like that would be something pretty sick. Insane.
It'd be unfair. If like Notre Dame's like, screw it, we're going all in, we're going to buy players, which I don't want them to do, Ryan. I really don't.
Yeah.
But if they did, oh my gosh.
Yep.
Give me a break. This
And
is the last one, Ryan, and we'll wrap it up.
Jonathan Gabrick says, so if we get Gerby Lambert, that puts us at 23. Are we good with the number, or do we go one or two more? And if so, what positions do we look at?
I think we talked about this a little bit, Ryan. I could see them trying to flip a tight end, Carter Nelson. I shouldn't say a tight end, Carter Nelson. I think they could still look at Justin Scott or if another D tackle kind of emerges during the year. I could see that as well. Trying to flip Caleb Beasley. Outside of that, I think, because here's the thing, they're loaded in 2025. Like the 2025 class is really loaded, Jonathan. And I think the way that Notre Dame looks at it is we would rather use that extra scholarship unless it's on like a dude, Carter Nelson, Justin Scott, Caleb Beasley, like a dude. Unless it's that kind of player, we'd rather focus on 25 and then separate, balance the classes out a little bit instead of getting a 28-1 class, getting, 23, 24, 23, 23. And that's going to help with some of the kids not leaving because you're not overloading in certain classes. But look, they're done at quarterback. They're done at running back. They're done at wide receiver. They're done on the offensive line if they get Gearby. They're done at defensive end. They're done at linebacker. They're done at safety for 24 kids. Obviously, like I said, I count Davis Andrews as a 26 kid. And Notre Dame is still recruiting Davis Andrews a lot. He's going to visit on next Sunday as part of the barbecue. That's going to be big for Notre Dame. I love that kid, but I count him as a 26 kid because he is going on the mission, but he would, be a 24 recruit. It's just how I view it. So I think other than that, I think their focus is and should be on the 25 class, which is a really, really loaded class. There's no doubt about it. And I like the idea of kind of spreading the kids out a little bit, so there's just not like 29, 30 in one class. It also leaves you some options to say, hey, we've got a couple scholarships to work with in case you need to go get a transfer kid at a certain position next year as well. I think that's a good way to have roster management where you just don't load up on 30 kids one year, 28 the next, and then just naturally have to process some kids out. So that's how I see it. And then we had a big old super chat to end the sucker from K Grant. My man, I appreciate you very, very much. Brian with the shirt. Yeah, this is a big one, man. This was a big commitment for Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it. Definitely a gap closer for the Irish. So that's going to do it, everybody. Have a great rest of your night. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. If you have not done so, sign up for our message board. We've had a ton of signups this last week. We're just getting closer and closer and closer to our preseason goal, our first game of the season goal. Really excited about that. Definitely check all that stuff out. We'll be back tomorrow. Ryan will have a recruiting podcast tomorrow at 1:00. He's going to break down kind of our next in line of our 2025 preview. We'll be back. Vince and I will be back on Tuesday for our sort of our preseason overview, camp overview for Notre Dame. So definitely check that out as well. If you have not done so, subscribe to our podcast, Irish Breakdown Podcast, and also sign up for the CFB Nation podcast. We had some really good content on there last week from the CFB All-America guys. Lucky Lefty, obviously, is putting stuff up there on a daily basis. Brian Smith is putting stuff up on there. I'm going to have a lot of shows on there this year. So you really definitely, if you're not subscribed to the CFB Nation podcast, you're missing out. You definitely want to check that out, folks. So we'll talk to you again here very soon. Thanks for being with us today. Big pickup for Notre Dame. Really, really huge for getting Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa. Now it's go get Gearby Lambert, go get Davis Andrews, and it's a wrap. And get ready for the 2023 season. Talk to you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.